So, Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. This is the last of this year's Booker books which I have read. I finished it about half an hour ago. I saved it till last because it had so many fabulous reviews on YouTube and elsewhere that I thought I wanted to save it till last. That also left me slightly alarmed because quite often I find that my views on things differ from other people's, and I was slightly worried that having deliberately saved this one, it wasn't going to be as good as I hoped it was going to be, and that would have been very disappointing. But I'm happy to say I wasn't remotely disappointed. It is a fabulous book. I am so pleased to have read it. I'm so pleased to have found George Saunders, whom I'd heard of before, but I've never read anything else by him. I will be starting to read his short stories from now. And I'm so pleased it's on the shortlist. And if there's any justice in this world, it will win when the prize is announced tomorrow. But anyway, that's a separate question. I will have a predictions video coming separately in a moment. But Lincoln in the Bardo. So it is a book. It's a historical novel, like Days Without End, like the Underground Railroad, set in roughly the same period, so American Civil War, and it is about Abraham Lincoln's reaction to the death of his son Willie, and it is set in the night after Willie has been put into his tomb in the cemetery, and primarily characterised by a range of humorous ghosts who wander around the cemetery having their arguments, recounting parts of their lives, recounting their fears about what might come next, unwilling to admit that they're actually dead. The coffin is just a sick box. It's not actually a sign that they're dead. And some of them have seen what is to come in terms of judgment, and others haven't. And some of them are sensible, and others are dilettantes, or it's a huge mixture of different types of people. So you have this wonderful scene which is populated with, I don't know, I didn't count them, maybe 30 ghosts, all with very different characters, backgrounds, as though they are life in the microcosm of this cemetery where they all happen to have been buried, or just outside the cemetery where the black ghosts and some of a smaller number of the poorer white ghosts have also been buried. And into this comes Lincoln, the president bowed down by the Civil War, and in desperate sorrow for the death of his son. And it's an extraordinary book in that it manages to convey the depths of Lincoln's despairing sorrow at the same time as showing the humour of these grotesquely distorted ghosts and their sympathies for Lincoln and their own selfish desires to use him and use his son as a way to escape the life that they are in, or the death that they are in, and their fears about doing that. It is a book which I found by turns very, very funny, desperately sad, and also in a strange way hugely comforting, because as Lincoln sits here among these ghosts, which he doesn't know are there, but we're able to hear his thoughts because they can enter into his body and hear what he is thinking. As he sits there, he comes to an accommodation within himself of how to accept his son's death and how to use it and see it as a way in which he can then go out into the world and continue as president, and continue waging a war which is killing other people's sons, which he's extremely conscious of. And so it's this incredible mixture of different emotions, and this is never done in a heavy way. So I've complained in some of my other Booker reviews about the author's views coming through in a heavy-handed monologue or sort of section of, let me tell you now in a lecture what I as author think about this situation. This doesn't happen in Lincoln in the Bardo at all. There are sections where the I've entirely forgotten what I was going to say. This doesn't happen to me that often, but occasionally I entirely forget what I'm going to say. So it doesn't come across in a heavy-handed way at all. The narrative, I've now remembered, the narrative is told in this a very unusual bitty dialogue style, almost as though it was a play. But there are two things going on. One is the sections of monologue, as it were, from all of these different ghosts. And it's unclear whether they're speaking these things out loud or whether it is what they are thinking. It doesn't really matter. But at the same time, there are also sections of supposedly historical sources describing the party that the Lincolns throw the night that their son dies, or before their son dies, and people's reactions to what they see of Lincoln during the period of mourning, and of Mrs. Lincoln during her mourning, but also views of how the president is making a huge mistake in the war that he is engaged in. And so there's a huge, and people's arguments against him as their own sons are killed, and how he cannot possibly understand what he's putting other families through. So there's this huge range of sources, the supposedly historical, which Saunders has made up, plus all of these different ghosts coming together to create a sort of collage of all of these things that are going on, all of these emotions and versions of the truth which are playing out, and none of them is given more weight than any other. There's no sense that anywhere that this is the narrator's voice speaking or the author's voice speaking, and this is what we are supposed to believe and go away with as our sense of the truth. And that's very different from a lot of the other novels on the Booker list, where there does seem to be a view of what we should think. That's there quite strongly, I think, in, for example, Camilla Shamsie's Home Fire. It's there strongly in Exit West. It's there strongly in 4321. I haven't yet done my video on the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, but I think there as well the author's voice comes through quite clearly. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but what I like about Lincoln in the Bardo is this sense that all of these emotions are swimming around in this purgatorial place full of ghosts who are not yet ready or willing to move on to their final judgment, and whether they will end up in a sort of heaven or a sort of hell. And there is no judgment about which of these emotions, which of these views on the world, these views on Lincoln we are meant to see. And that to me is the mark of a great novel. It is a novel whose very unusual form does not get in the way of what it's trying to do. So the form is in the service of what Saunders is doing, rather than sort of in antipathy to it, which again can often be the case. And Lincoln in the Bardo is like Reservoir 13 and Solar Bones in that respect, an unusual form which doesn't get in the way of what's being said and actually adds to it. But this sense of all of these conflicting emotions and views, which are equally valid, equally strong, and which all, in this reader anyway, call forth something that needs a response. I laughed at it. I didn't quite cry at it. It's very rare for me to cry at a novel. But I felt both its sorrow and its comfort that the various sorrows which I happen to be going through at the moment might be assuaged to a certain extent by the courage which is found in this novel in dealing with a very particular sort of sorrow which is related to death and early death. So I think this is an absolutely fabulous book. I know I'm not alone in saying that. I dearly hope it will win when the prize is announced tomorrow. I will do a separate video on what I think might win. But Lincoln in the Bardo, if you haven't read it, go read it. It's fabulous.